Would you breathe with me, please? Take it in. And another. And one more. I needed that after this morning. So I want you to listen to a few pretty well-used phrases and see if they resonate with you. See if they sound at all familiar to you. Things just don't work out for me. I've tried and it never happens. I just can't seem to catch a break. How about, why does this always happen? Oh man, not again. You always, she always, it always, they always. Anybody? Yeah. I could go on and on, but you get the gist. It is the syndrome of determining what is possible in our lives based on our past experiences. Which isn't all that unusual, because it's true that we develop many of our belief systems, in fact, all of our belief systems, those programs that are running deep down inside of us, they are primarily based on our past experiences, no doubt. And those hidden belief systems very much determine what we attract into our lives. In many cases, over and over and over again. So in essence, when we start using phrases like that, they start to become self-fulfilling prophecies. It doesn't work for me because it's never worked for me. Yes? Or that happened to me because it always happens to me. So it sounds familiar, but it is not a metaphysical truth. A metaphysical spiritual truth is that I lost my place. I'm sorry. That metaphysical truth is that we don't have to be stuck in something by virtue of what has happened before. When we are living from our true selves, from our true potential, from our limitless selves, and we're going to talk more about that, we are not bound by the past, but rather we are creating things right here in the here and now. So it is up to us whether we're going to keep attracting the same things over and over again, or whether we're going to choose something different and hopefully better. Are you with me? Yeah. Are you following me? Okay. So let's talk about why this works. Let's talk about what happens here. Because if we just look at things from our human selves, from this material world, it sounds implausible that all I have to do is change what I choose, and I'm going to change what's happening to me. That doesn't make sense from a human standpoint. However, one of my favorite quotes, it's attributed to both Ernest Holmes and also Judge Troward. But because Thomas Troward lived before Ernest Holmes, I suspect that he said it first and Ernest Holmes borrowed it. Okay, but see if this sounds familiar to you. Principle is not bound by precedent. Principle, with a capital P, is not bound by precedent. What that means, I'm going to explain it, don't worry, is that principle, and it's always when it has a capital P, it's one of the many names for God, and a principle is an immutable truth, it is an undeniable truth. So this undeniable truth is not limited by what has or has not happened in the past. Because its time, principle's time, is right here and right now. It doesn't get stuck in the always or the nevers. In fact, Ernest Holmes does say, I do know this is Ernest Holmes, the universe is inexhaustible. It is limitless, knows no bounds, and has no confines. And because we are made of this same limitless universal energy, even when we don't know it, because we are made of that, we are also not bound by precedent, by what has gone before. Right?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Ideally, right. Ideally, right. And yet, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'm bound by my past. Sometimes I am bound by my past. And maybe I'm the only one. Maybe I'm the only one that finds myself stuck in old ways of thinking that don't serve me any longer. Maybe this is one of those talks, it happens when I give it for myself and you guys just get to listen in. Or maybe this is something that affects most of us. This tendency to play small because of beliefs from the past. So the question then is why? Why do we do that? Why is it that we're made of this boundless energy, but we find ourselves bound? We find ourselves stuck in less than stellar situations. Why is that? Well, one of the paradoxes of life is that we are absolutely spiritual beings having a human experience. I say that almost every Sunday. But along with that human experience, what we have is free will. What we have is freedom of choice. So even though we may be made up of this limitless potential and this possibility, and it's everywhere around us, sometimes we choose how we're going to utilize it. And sometimes we don't utilize it for our own greater good. Yes? Because many of us, nobody here, but many of us are ignorant to the idea that we are surrounded by limitlessness, by potential and possibility. And because we don't know that, we limit ourselves by believing that we are limited. We limit ourselves to believing that we are bound by the precedent of what has gone on before us. Interestingly, one of the synonyms for the word precedent is pattern. You hear me talk about patterns often. So another way of putting this is that we limit ourselves by our patterns from the past. And because they keep repeating themselves over and over again, we think that they are a present reality. We think that this is the now, and the now is not on our side. So because they keep repeating ourselves, they become that present reality, and then that enforces them and binds them into place. And that's where we're saying, it always, it never. Because we're thinking it, it's come from the past, we're thinking it, and it's stuck right here, and we keep repeating it. And it becomes one of those patterns or those habits that don't serve us. So we end up feeling stuck. We end up feeling frustrated, unmotivated. As Henry Van Dyke put it, as long as habit and routine dictate the pattern of living, new dimensions of the soul will not emerge. As long as habit and routine dictate the pattern of living, new dimensions of the soul will not emerge. So what is the solution? Anybody? What's the solution? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. What the heck? This is my 15 minutes in the spotlight. So we are in a material world. Okay, you got it? We are living this human existence, absolutely, and that includes the phenomenon of precedents and past memories and patterns and all that other kind of stuff. So how do we break free? And is that we begin imagining, just like Amy was singing, we begin imagining the life that we want to live. And one of the ways we do that is to break free, is to realize that it is our spiritual nature to be boundless. It is our spiritual nature to be free, to be creative. It is who and what we are. Because if we don't know that it's our nature and we don't believe it, then we can't change it. Have you ever tried to believe something that you can't believe? You don't believe it, you can't change it. However, once we start to get a clue of our personal creativity, once we start to get a clue of our power, we can begin to consciously, on purpose, begin creating something new. Once we know that we have the power. So I'm going to give you an example. This personal story. I may have shared part of this story before. I can't remember. But it's a good one, so I'm going to tell it again. Back in the 1990s, when I was in ministerial training in Southern California, there was a widely held belief system that new ministers would never, ever, ever get jobs as ministers in Southern California. It was unheard of. This was before staff minister designations or anything like this. So what we were told was that the only way that we were going to be able to be ministers and be senior ministers was to go someplace else and do what they call start a work, which means go someplace else and start a center for spiritual living. And what they were recommending was kind of undesirable places that nobody else wanted to go, right? But they told us absolutely under no circumstances should you fool yourself into believing that you could find a job in Southern California, because they simply were not available to people fresh out of ministerial training. And there were a lot of us. There were a lot of ministerial graduates coming along. So that was the precedent. That was the strongly held belief system. Except that didn't work for me, because I didn't want to leave my home and my family and start a center someplace else. At least not then. Spirit had an interesting idea for me, but that was years later and another story. So even though there was a precedent in our movement based on the past, it wasn't my precedent. So when I did my spiritual work about my ministry, I didn't discount the possibility of starting and staying in Southern California. In fact, I made it very clear in my treatment work that I was open to the idea. By that I mean that I consciously chose not to buy into that belief system, and instead to put my powerful mind in conjunction, this limitless possibility that I was starting to wake up to, put it into manifesting something else. And, a year went by, and I cannot tell you that I did not have some fear around it. I absolutely had some fear around it. But look at this quote. I put this on Facebook. A lot of people liked it, from Judge Thomas Trode, having to do with fear and manifesting. He said, therefore, whatever may be the nature of our anxiety, we should endeavor to dispel it by the consideration that there may be already existing other facts we do not know of, which will produce a different result from the one we fear. And that in any case, there is a power which can produce new facts in answer to our appeal to it. OMG! I'm going to read it again because it's so cool. Therefore, whatever may be the nature of our anxiety, folks, we should endeavor to dispel it by the consideration that there may be already existing other facts we do not know of, which will produce a different result from the one we fear. Woohoo! And in any case, there is a power which can produce new facts in answer to our appeal to it. Yes! Sure enough, after a year of doing my spiritual work, I graduated ministerial school, I get a phone call out of the blue from the ministers of the tiny little center in Temecula, California, about 30 miles from my home. I thought they were calling to ask me to sing or maybe to be a guest speaker. So when I called her back, her name was Joan, Gia, she said, Pat, we're moving to North Carolina in 3 weeks. I heard you might be interested in becoming a minister. I think this center would be interested in you if you were interested in doing it part-time. Would you think that in, let that sink in. It was in Southern California. It was 30 miles from my home. It was part-time so I could keep making a living at my other job. And it was just the right size for me because I was a brand new minister. It was just the right size for me to get my feet wet as a minister. And it was in Southern California. The rest is history, or I should say her story, because that center grew into a beautifully viable and successful spiritual center even today. I heard on Easter Sunday they had standing room only and 55 children. Yeah. So I want you to think about all the factors that had to come together to overcome that precedent or that belief that churches in Southern California never became available to new ministers. And it might have been true until it wasn't. Because principle is not bound by precedent. Principle is not bound by anything. It is forever expanding. It is forever becoming more of itself. That is its nature. And it is also our nature when we recognize it, when we work with it, and when we open ourselves up to it. Ernest Holmes again, the creative energy of spirit must be limitless. Therefore, we can set no limit to the possibility of what it can do for us. Undoubtedly, it is able to give us infinitely more than we have expected, understood, or accepted. We must believe that it will not only make the gift, but it will also, out of its own being, create the way, the method, and the means through which the gift is to come to us. I kind of want to close right there, but I have one more thing I want to talk about. Because, as with anything that is worthwhile, breaking a pattern or getting on the other side of a precedent takes awareness and it takes training, it takes time. It takes awareness of the precedent that we're saying, oh my gosh, here comes that pattern again, here comes that precedent again. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's unconscious. And then training ourselves to choose something different. Like I did. No, I'm not leaving Southern California at that time. I'm staying in California and I'm doing ministry. Spirit, you figure out how to get it to me. So it takes training and it takes awareness and it takes doing it in the moment, not sometime in the future, not in the past. Because when we're talking about shift, we are talking about it happening right here, right now, in this now moment. It can't happen any other way. Because the perfect moment of creation, where divine mind works, is right now. The boundlessness of the present. And so we're going to practice a little bit. I'm going to ask Esteban to come up and noodle around for a little bit. I'm going to take us through just a brief visualization. So if you are willing to close your eyes, please do so. Take a deep breath in and let it out. And find yourself beginning to relax. This is your moment. This is your time. For the next few moments, nothing else you need to do. No place you need to be. Feel yourself melting into the chair you're sitting in. You don't need to remember the lesson. It's already in there. Just allow yourself to relax. Now bring to mind something that you would like to experience in life, but for whatever reason, it has yet to manifest. Maybe it's that lifelong dream, or maybe it's just a parking space. Just bring it to mind. As you contemplate this thing that you want to experience, imagine in your mind's eye that it has a visible trail of old ideas, old phrases, old beliefs attached to it. Maybe they're from your history, or something someone has said to you. An old belief about yourself. Maybe it comes from the collective consciousness. See these old ideas as tendrils of energy reaching back from the past, keeping that idea bound in place, unable to move, unable to manifest, unable to come to fruition. Now bring to mind a bright, shining light of truth. Whatever color you want, whatever density you want, a bright, shining light of truth that represents spirit in this now moment. And as you watch it, it keeps renewing itself, keeps refreshing. It maintains its brilliance. And as you experience it, you intuitively know that its possibilities are endless. Keep that light in mind. And now shine this light on your idea of what you want to manifest. And see that idea becoming renewed and alive with possibilities. Notice that the light is dispelling and eliminating the tendrils of the past that have kept the idea bound. They are shriveling up. They are retreating back to the past, where they have no power. Your dream, your idea, is now free of the past and is enlivened by the light of the present. And now see yourself stepping into this mental picture, this idea that is now alive with possibility. It is yours. You are embodying a new idea. You are seeing a new picture. You are living a new truth for yourself. Take a few moments to be in that energy of possibility. Begin to bring yourself back. Begin to feel the chair again underneath you. floor. You can wiggle your toes or your fingers. And when you're ready, come back to the room. Open your eyes. Be here now, alive, limitless, and filled with possibility. And so it is.